gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Jace for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jace Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr., John Morantz, Joe Johnsons, Ja Raffs, of course. We've got Jace. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
So we have, between the men's and women's tournaments, 12 teams that have clinched a spot in the Elite Eight so far, because we've got 4 more teams to figure out here. On the women's side, we have 0 1 seeds and 2 seeds. This is on both sides. Obviously, 0 1 seeds in the men's Elite Eight, 2 1 seeds got knocked out before the Sweet 16 on the women's side. This has got to be some kind of, I don't exactly know how to measure it, but we got ourselves historic tournaments here.
Well, on the men's side, you can measure it by there's never been an Elite Eight without a 1 seed, and there's an Elite Eight this year without a 1 seed. So from that perspective, it literally is has never happened. So, and from the women's side of things, right? It is measured much more, I don't know, in a much more nuanced way than that. But every year in the women's tournament that we get a little bit more carnage than we did the year before is inching closer to what the men's tournament is and the reasons that people get so excited for the men's tournament, and things like Indiana losing in the round of 32 as a 1 seed, and 12s beating 5s and 11s beating 6s, like that hasn't always happened in the women's tournament, and now it does, and it happens relatively consistently, and you can do things like be locked into the 5 versus 12 matchups because somebody's probably going to lose, and an 11 seed's probably going to beat a 6 seed, and that's especially early in the tournament what makes the tournament so fun. And so every year that happens a little bit more on the women's side, and that's a fun thing.
Yeah, and we'll get some more 1s and 2s because the 1 seeds that are remaining didn't play yesterday. But regardless, yeah, we've never seen anything quite like this. Obviously, on the men's side, literally have never seen this. And you combine the two, this is it's going to be interesting to see how we talk about these tournaments at the end, especially the men's one, because well, South Carolina wins the women's, that speaks for itself. But yeah, it is full March chaos.
Well, get ready, because at some point we'll get all excited and declare that whoever wins the men's tournament was the best basketball team of the year. So get ready. Is there any team left that if they won, you'd be like, I can, like, that you would be able to stand the idea of people saying, was that really just the best team all year?
You almost stole the words out of my mouth. Yes, one.
Is it Texas?
Yes.
There's probably a case for that. Let me ask you a question. With Chris Beard, are they in this position?
I was not ready for that question.
I know, right?
Yes?
I can't think of a reason why they wouldn't be.
Yeah. That's not to say that Rodney Terry didn't have to do anything. That's more, I trust Chris Beard, the basketball coach, if what happened hadn't happened, that Rodney Terry is proving he's also a very good coach that is getting the most out of this team, and I have no reason to doubt that Chris Beard would have had all of the other stuff not happen. So I would say yes.
And you've been pretty consistent about how you feel about Texas on both ends of the floor, and how the feeling that they might be the most well-rounded team in the country, and metrics would suggest that they are one of the most well-rounded teams in the country. And even the teams that are, by KenPom definition, more well-rounded, like the Houstons of the world, clearly had some shortcomings. Alabama had some shortcomings, and Texas's are less clear. And it's things like they could lock in a little bit more defensively on a more consistent basis, but that's a lot different than you rely too much on the 3-pointer. Those are two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
It's Saturday morning, 8:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It has been raining outside Indianapolis for, I think, a year at this point. Like it's been roughly a year that it's been raining outside, and it continues to be wet on the ground outside this morning. But inside, here we are talking about college hoops, and we had 2 1 seeds go down last night, Josh, and we had 2 1 seeds go down in, I think, what you would describe as the ways that if those 2 1 seeds were going to go down, that's how it's going to happen. It was, at least on the Alabama side, and certainly, Houston's offense at times last night did not exactly look prolific, and they just needed a little more on that end of the floor and didn't exactly get it. Which one of these 1 seed losses would you like to start with?
Let's start with number 1 overall seed.
The number 1 overall seed, the Alabama Crimson Tide, fall to the San Diego State Aztecs. The Aztecs, who are now 30-6 on the season after last night's win, 71-64. And this was how it was probably going to happen, Josh. If it was going to happen and Alabama was going to lose in this tournament, it was probably going to look something like this. If they lost, I guess I'll put the caveat, if they lost before the Final Four, that it was probably going to look something like this. Real quick, on the San Diego State side, 37.7% from the field, 6 of 17 from the three-point line, and they missed 9 of their 22 free throws, 13 of 22. So it ain't like the San Diego State Aztec just couldn't miss. It's not like they ran away from Alabama and some incredible offensive performance that Alabama just couldn't quite keep up with. Because here's what happened on the offensive side of things for Alabama. 23 of 71. 3 of 27 from the three-point line. 3 of 27. And 15 of 20 from the free throw line. But the 2 big ones there are the overall field goal percentage and then 3 of 27 from the three-point line. The reliance on the 3 has kind of been there all year, and they did their best to try to get us to forget about it, because at times it got really hard to not think, well, maybe they're just so much better than pretty much everybody that it won't matter until deep, deep into the tournament. And they would go on stretches where they looked absolutely unbeatable. But it was probably always going to come at some point. I thought that it might have been the game against, what was it, Maryland? Was their round of 32 game?
Maryland.
I thought that might have been the game. I thought that might have been the game that had some inklings of, okay, maybe this is the one that they have to survive. In fact, it ended up being their Sweet 16 matchup that they needed to find a way to survive, and it did not happen, and they fell 71-64 on a truly, truly atrocious shooting night.
And this is also a story about matchups. And maybe not paying quite as much attention to them as we should have. Maybe. Just from the sense of, and I think we did mention this very briefly in our preview pod when the bracket came out, but this was set up to be Virginia, San Diego State. The same thing would have happened, probably, I would argue, if Virginia was in this game instead. You're facing an elite defensive team and you are a team in Alabama that is going to take 27 threes whether they go in or not. And what San Diego State was able to do is something most teams in the country can't do because they're not that good defensively. San Diego State is phenomenal on that end of the floor. And so they were able to create the the issues that I just wasn't sure were going to show themselves this extreme to kind of come out, and that was weird phrasing, but I didn't think it was going to be this much of an issue. I didn't think they were going to have this kind of stinker because there are only so many teams that can create something like this. Even though Alabama's kind of welcoming that possibility every time they take the floor because of the way they play. But San Diego State is one of those teams that can make it happen. And it's also interesting because to get here, they were playing other mid-majors, 12, 13. They had just gotten and taken care of business, to be clear. But then they just kind of jumped from Furman to the number 1 overall seed and took care of business there too. And did it on a day where Matt Bradley had 6 points on 2 of 9 shooting and got called for 2 fouls that I have some questions on that we don't need to get into. But he caught bad breaks all around. And it still didn't matter because everybody else stepped up. They're really good. They're elite defensively, and they made Alabama pay for doing what Alabama does.
I was looking because I was curious how many times that they had shot like really, really poorly this year. I went back. I went to just their college basketball reference game logs page as a team because I was curious. Like, what is it? What happened? First of all, they were 9 of 13 from the 3-point line against Oklahoma. We're talking about that game. They lost 93-69. They were 9 of 13 from the 3-point line in that game. As long as college basketball reference isn't just wrong. But that was their best statistical 3-point shooting. Their best 3-point shooting game of the season, which was at least from a percentage perspective, not from a total makes perspective. That was against Auburn, a game that they only won in overtime, which is interesting. So at the bottom of this, so they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games where they shot worse than 25% from the 3-point line as a team. They won until last night, all 11 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because it kind of, and I don't know, I don't totally know if I was certainly part of that, but like, and two of their losses they shot 26% and 25%. So 2 of their losses are just on the outside of this, but the other 4 losses that they took are much higher on this list of 3-point shooting percentage than I would have expected. So all of the time this year, in by definition, their worst shooting performances of the season from a 3-point shooting perspective, they won all of them. Mm-hmm. Whether it's their 1 of 8 against Maryland in the NCAA tournaments. At one point, they went 6 of 33 against Vanderbilt, won that game by 12. 1 of 13 against Mississippi State, won that game by 23. Memphis, they were 1 of 12 and still scored 91 points and won the game. Ole Miss, I know, was bad, but 2 of 24 and they won the game by 22. This is not exactly painting the same picture that I thought it was going to, but at the same time was exactly the way that I thought Alabama was going to lose in the tournament. It's an interesting list of games to look at, because then I go, okay, well, maybe they turned it over a gajillion times in all of those games. And it's like, not really. Like they certainly weren't the best at taking care of the basketball, but there were a couple of, like not great turnover performances. Like in the Auburn overtime win where they knocked down 12 of 20, they turned the ball over 17 times. But like if you add 2 or 3 in the overtime, then you're like in a relatively normal spot for this particular Alabama team. So nothing especially like stuck out there. Anyways, I just found it. I think that's the correct picture to paint with this Alabama team. Like I don't think that's incorrect. but at the same time, it doesn't exactly play itself out in their game logs the way that I thought it would be.
And it does a disservice to their season to lump this loss this season in with past teams where you could look at the box score and go, oh, they had a stinker from the 3-point line. That's why they lost. Right. Because that was not, they overcame that this season, which is why I was way more confident in them. Not confident enough to pick and win a national championship because it still is a flaw. And your margin of error gets slimmer when you're playing the best teams in the country, not Vanderbilt and Mississippi, Ole Miss or Mississippi State or whoever it might be. Where now all of a sudden it becomes an even bigger issue because this is a really good San Diego State team and a San Diego State team that, to your point, can actually bother you and stop you from getting to the basket too. Right? Because that's kind of how this team has been able to overcome the 3-point shooting when it hasn't happened is they change course. San Diego State, again, elite defensive team. I didn't think anybody until the Elite Eight, maybe, and the Final Four specifically, was going to have what it took to get both things to go the way that San Diego State did. And clearly I was just wrong on that. But I'm glad you brought that up because, yeah, we got to separate this. Yes, it came down to the 3-point shooting and the fact that Brandon Miller had an atrocious tournament. But it's not like this was this glaring hole or glaring weakness that was costing them games all season.
No, I think it can be both, though. I think it was a glaring weakness, but I don't think it was a glaring weakness that was causing them to lose a bunch of games.
Right. It made them vulnerable in the NCAA tournament. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. And why this is probably the best Alabama team that we've seen is because they found ways to win games, even when that glaring hole showed itself, and it didn't always matter. And at some point in this tournament, it was going to matter, and that's where both of us came down on Alabama in the NCAA tournament, is that at some point it was going to matter, and they were going to lose, because of that. That's what I thought. I thought they were going to run into a team that was playing too well to get away with shooting exactly what they shot in this game. And then, when one of the things that I think helped that, and that they didn't necessarily have didn't have the last couple of years, is a guy like Brandon Miller to lean on when things weren't going well. Yep. And that's the other big thing from Alabama's tournament run, and part of the reason that it ended prematurely. And he wasn't great in this game. He was really quite the opposite in this game, but it is a larger scope and a larger commentary on his NCAA tournament as a whole. He was 3 of 19 from the floor for 9 points in this game, 1 of 10 from the 3-point line, 11 rebounds, but he had 6 turnovers, and that adds to his totals, which are the following for the NCAA tournament, Josh. 3 games, 28 points, 8 of 41 from the field, 3 of 19 from the 3-point line, 6 assists to just 10 turnovers, or I guess 10 turnovers to just 6 assists. That was the performance that Brandon Miller put together in the NCAA tournament. He didn't score in the first round, and even though he had 19 in their second game of this tournament, it was a 19 on 19 shots kind of thing. I think it was 5 of 19 from the field in that particular game, maybe 5 of 18, but somewhere in that vicinity. It was not exactly the shining moment for what will likely be one of the top 3 picks in the NBA draft in June.
Yeah. And like you said, that's the other part of this, is he was the secret to overcoming the inherent vulnerability in the way that they approach the game. And he was just not able to paper over the cracks in this tournament. And there's a whole nother conversation to be had about kind of his mental headspace with all of this and the way Alabama's handled it. And we don't need to get into that today. I will just say I am just glad that we don't have to get to a Final Four, get to a national championship game, potentially get to a national champion with all of the just icky, uncomfortable feelings that would have come had Alabama continued to advance. That's not me wishing them failure, but it was going to be part of the story because of what's happened this season, and so that needs to be acknowledged as they exit, that it just would have been really uncomfortable and awkward had they ended up winning this thing. And so now this is kind of, I mean, it's still going to come because Brandon Miller's going to go to the draft and it's going to be part of that. But from a college basketball, from a NCAA tournament storyline standpoint, it is now no longer part of the conversation.
Agreed. Another 1 seed loss last night.
They did.
89-75, the Miami Hurricanes beat the Houston Cougars. 89 points against Houston is ridiculous. Preposterous. Led by the backcourt that's been the nucleus of everything at Miami this year. Nigel Pack, 26 on 8 of 12 shooting, 7 of 10 from the three-point line. Almost as good as Luke Kennard last night. Isaiah Wong, 20 points, 5 of 11 from the field, got to the free throw line 11 times and successfully converted on 9 of them, and double figures for all 5 starters for Miami. And this was one of those games that felt like it was played at Miami's pace. And at some point, Houston, who not necessarily built to play from behind, had to play from behind pretty early, and didn't put together the defensive performance that they needed to get it done. It actually got worse in the second half from a points in perspective. 42-36, Miami was winning this game at halftime. They put up 47 in the second half. And to see a team, after we watched Houston play defense and just play all year, to watch them go out in a game that is not of the 64-59 perspective, but an 89-75, and for Houston to not even play that poorly on the offensive end, like, it wasn't great. I mean, Marcus Sasser was 4 of 12, Jarris Walker was 4 of 16. It certainly wasn't great, but to watch Houston lose by 14 in a game that they scored 75 points, and that's how they exit the tournament, is not exactly something I was expecting to see, but it was Miami led by that backcourt that was able to get it done.
Yeah, and another story of matchups. And we talked about this had Iowa gotten out of that first round game. This idea of they're not as good as Houston, obviously, but if you catch them on the wrong day, they're scoring 80 no matter what because they're Iowa. And Miami has some of those similar vibes because of these guards. Right. When they shoot 44% from 3 and they take 25 of them, you're in trouble. And great offense is always going to beat great defense. There just aren't very many teams in the sport that can do this offensively. I saw De'Aaron Fox talking about how he can't even watch a full game of college basketball because one of the things he pointed out was the lack of shot making. Miami doesn't have that problem. And so here we are again with this team that was just, I mean, obviously they were good during the regular season. They shared a ACC regular season title in a down year, but here they are in the Elite Eight again because of these guards.
Yep.
And I just completely dismissed that last season, and that was a mistake because they're doing it again. Jim Larrañaga, another guy who just knows how to do this, going back to George Mason, and now he's done it twice with Miami getting to the Elite Eight. Yeah, it was jarring to see Houston's defense get ripped to shreds like that. And it's also, now, did I think it was going to be this way that they lost? No. But it still is my fundamental concern with Houston and the way that when you're trying to win one-dimensionally, is when things go haywire, because they will. And when you can't dictate the terms of a game, you can't play out the script the way you want to. do you have the ability to overcome it?
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue scoring 75 points implied the answer was yes. Because this wasn't just a team scoring some points. This was a ridiculously good offensive performance.
Right.
But you're not going to be able to hold every team to 48, 52, 56 points. And you got a hot team, right? Clearly, if you get this far, you're playing well, and they stepped it up to a whole nother level, clearly. But it's the concern with Houston, it's the concern with Virginia, and sometimes it's just better to be good at the right time than good throughout the season. And that's Miami was just kind of saving all the firepower, say we'll get there, put ourselves in a decent position, have a regular season title to make sure we get a fine seed, and then just let these guards go. And that was quite something they put on the show.
So Houston finishes the season 33-4. If they give up, if they had scored 75 points in like every game that they played this season, instead of the point total that they scored in that game, if they just scored 75 points, they would have only lost one game that they won. They would have lost to South Florida, a game that they actually won 83-77. They would have lost that game 77-75, and they would have tied Memphis at the end of regulation 75-75 in the AAC tournament final. Other than that, the results are exactly the same. They would have beaten Alabama, the game that they lost, 75-71. They would have beaten Temple 75-56. That one still is a little bit. My point being is that they, like, I have a hard time knocking them for not being able to withstand 75 points when they didn't let it. Like, this was the first time that anyone scored 80 on them all year.
Yep.
And I just struggle a little. Like, at some point, right? Like, scoring 75 is like should be enough. Like, I just think this is more about Houston's defense falling apart in a way I didn't think it was. That there was a performance out there that could make Houston's defense as helpless as it was last night. I wasn't sure that was the case. I didn't think that offense existed, and last night it just did. And I don't know if it was only Miami and only on that night that was possible. Excuse me, amateur podcaster here, going to turn off my phone sound. And it just was. And I didn't think that was, at least for it to look as helpless as it did by the time the game was, and it got a little closer, and it was like, okay, there are still 4 minutes left in this game. This game is not over yet, but it was kind of, it got inevitable pretty quickly to the point where as long as Miami didn't make absolutely atrocious mistakes, they were going to win at the under 4 timeout. And that was more what I was not expecting, because I was a little worried about Houston's offense getting them all the way to the Final Four and getting them to a national championship, sure, because that was the thing to point to if you were trying to come up with reasons why that 1 seed wasn't going to make it to the Final Four. But I also, I wasn't that worried. And if you told me that they don't
lose this game,
right? Like, if you told me that they were going to score 75 against Miami, I would have given them a pretty good chance to win. Now, against Miami, the number 6 offense in the country this year, that might have just barely been enough, like 75-73. Like, I would have expected it to be close, but to lose by 14, and to give up a better than 50% from the floor percentage, and to give up 11 of 25 from the 3-point line, those things I would not have been ready for.
Yeah, this is not. We need to rewrite Houston's season. We need to rewrite Kelvin Sampson's NCAA tournament legacy. This is the point that I continue to bring up time and time again. Things happen. They just drew Miami on the wrong night. right? If Indiana wins that game, they probably beat IU, and they're back in the Elite Eight playing Texas for a spot to go home in the Final Four. Mm-hmm. They just happened to get the offensive juggernaut, and the offensive juggernaut just happened to explode on them. I don't even think this is about their defense. To me, this is more about Miami's offense, and just there is clearly, if Houston can't do anything about it, nobody can do anything about it.
Right.
To me, it's kind of both. That these are the kind of things I'm still not convinced that Houston can overcome for 6 games, and I will keep saying that. But this also doesn't change my confidence in Houston's ability to get to Elite Eights and Final Fours, because they've been as good as anybody at not losing to the teams they're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. And they just so happened to get incredibly unlucky with the Miami team that showed up on the floor, which, again, in a tournament where, a lot of guards have struggled outside of Marquise Noel. Tyler Kolek loses in the second round. Miami's guards weren't spectacular. Alabama's guards weren't spectacular. You can go down the list. The teams remaining, we're not talking about some of the. I mean, Texas's guards are obviously very good, but this hasn't been a guards dominating tournament outside of Noel, and Miami's are also the exception to that, and a reminder that guards win in March.
Guards do, in fact, win in March. Anything else on this game?
No, I think that's it. To me, there's a very interesting Kelvin Sampson legacy discussion, not because of this game in particular, but just now you're going to the Big 12. What does this look like? Can they continue without Marcus Sasser to be what they've been the past couple seasons? Obviously, it's a top 5 program in the country at this point, but can they keep that up? And also, I guess the other thing that we're going to get an answer to now, not that we need to have a discussion about this, but what is the difference between the Big 12 and the AAC?
Mm. Yeah, I think the way to quantify that might just be, is this Apex Houston?
Right.
Is it Apex Kelvin Sampson from a how we feel about Houston? Because there's a world in which it's not. There's a world in which that we get to a point where the Big 12 goes through Houston, right? Like that could be the apex of this era of elite Houston basketball. Or it could just be this. Or it could be, some 1 seeds and, getting to the number 1, team in the AP poll and, that kind of thing. Or maybe it gets even higher than that. I think that's the thing I'm looking most closely at the next 24 months.
Because one of the things that doesn't get discussed enough, at least for me, is we always talk about how you need to win games, the Oklahoma States of the world who, finish 500, under 500 in Big 12 play or whatever. Why are we letting these teams 2 games over 500 in the NCAA tournament? The flip side to that is, how many teams would go into the AAC and win 16, 18 conference games? Because they're not playing Kansas and Kansas State and Texas and et cetera every single night in conference play. That part of it never seems to get discussed, of how many teams are capable of doing what Team X did in a weaker conference. We're going to get a really good litmus test for that when Houston, who has dominated the AAC and, might lose to Memphis, but that's about it in conference play, is now going into the Big 12. We're going to find out exactly at least have an example and some data on what this looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair to Houston, they had transcended that conversation about, well, are they just doing something that a Power 5 team could have done in the AAC as well? Yeah. If they were flaming out in the tournament immediately after winning 18 conference games, then we can have that conversation.
And they play a real non-conference schedule too. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think you're right. There's 2 sides to that coin when it comes to conference performance. When you're moving to the Big 12 and trying to compare them to their new power conference opponents, what those teams might have done in the AAC as well. The other two,
that was not a shot at Houston.
Sure.
That was just, Houston is going to be a test case for this general conversation. Yeah.
The other 2 games on this Thursday evening had one team that was better than the other. Number 6 Creighton puts an end to the run for the number 15 Princeton Tigers. 86-75, the final score. There are some really nice individual performances from some Princeton players. I mean, you got 40 from two guys. That's pretty
50.
good. Excuse me, 50. Man.
2/3 of the team's points. Yeah,
that's correct. 50 of the 75 coming from. You're gonna have to help me with the pronunciation of this first guy's name. Bumwan.
Yeah, I heard it on the broadcast, and now I'm forgetting. Yeah, I think it's a blue one.
I got this one locked down. Ryan Langborg. I got that one locked down. But
he had himself a tournament.
But
Shout out to Ryan Langborg.
He did have himself a tournament. 50 points between the two of them. His first name was Tosan. That would be my guess. 10 of 22 from the field for him. 11 of 17 for Ryan Langborg. That's 21 of 39. It's not bad. But Creighton was what we would call the better basketball team. Baylor Shireman 21-9-4. Like that might be the stat line I've been waiting for all year. Like not to 5 of 7 from the 3-point line, 8 of 11 from the field. Not to suggest that I have 4 steals. Not to suggest that he hasn't been good this year, because he has, but like that was the stat line I was envisioning when he transferred to Baylor. Creighton. Baylor transferring to Creighton. That was what I was envisioning from peak Creighton. That's the kind of impact I was expecting. That I was kind of envisioning that Shireman would have. Ryan Kalkbrenner, 22-5. 9 of 12 from the field. That I would consider that solid as well. Trey Alexander, 19 on 6 of 11 shooting. Ryan Nimhard was just fine from the scoring department. 9 points, 8 assists to 4 turnovers. Arthur Kaluma added 10 points of his own. Not a ton from the bench, but you didn't especially need it. And the Blue Jays march right into the Elite Eight, taking care of business in an 11-point victory.
Yeah, I think it was the 4-3 for Shireman. He banked in, and then the stats flash across the screen, and he's 4 of 4 from 3, and you go, oh, he's just having a day.
Sorry.
There's nothing.
Thanks for playing, Preston.
Right. He's hitting the ones he doesn't even shoot correctly. Yeah. It's over.
Yeah, absolutely. 86-75. Anything else you'd like to like? There's just Princeton made a push, and middle of the first half, this game was basically tied. Even later into the first half than that, this game was basically tied. It was 47-43 at the end of the first half. But for me, it was I never was really scared that Creighton was going to lose this basketball game. Pretty much from the jump, and it kind of maintained that throughout the game.
Yeah, I've expressed how we've talked about Creighton at length. The one thing I do want to say is just round of applause for Princeton.
Yeah.
For showing up in this game. They made enough threes to stay in it. They shot 43%, 9 of 21. They didn't have enough in the end of the day, and nobody outside of their top 2 guys scored more than 9 points. Right. But you beat Arizona, you back that up by beating Missouri, you show up in this game for a team coming out of the Ivy League that has been through so much in terms of shutting down during COVID, and they haven't exactly had an easy path to get here. And to put in 3 really good performances, you got to give this team credit. That it's easy to just kind of dismiss them as a 15 seed, but they proved that however the season went, what they're doing now is legit. They put in 3 really good performances. It just wasn't enough against an excellent Creighton team playing really well at the end of the day. And there's absolutely no shame in that.
And it's fun to watch a really high seed like that or a low seed like that not go out in a game that they're like they were clearly outmatched by Creighton, but also not the scoreboard didn't suggest so. Right, I think it's fun to watch a team go out in a game where they look like they belong still, rather than getting to a point where it's just kind of a game that they clearly don't belong anymore. right? Or that they are just so outclassed from a talent perspective that it's just overwhelming. And that wasn't the case in this game.
No, this could have been a Big East team traveling to play in Omaha,
right? Not like I mean, just to be clear, like not all encompassing. Just like this would be the type of performance that a Big East team would offer up on the road on a random.
Yes.
Yeah. That was a Big East quality performance against a really good Creighton team. And they keep on marching. I mean, we're looking real good over there in the South region right now. I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. I'm gonna keep it a buck. And you look really good in the Midwest. You look really good in the Midwest because you've got the keys, you've got the title, you've got the ownership, you've got whatever you want over the team that looks like they're the best team in that region, that being the Texas Longhorns. 29-8 they now are on the season after an 83-71 win over Xavier. Josh and I were hanging out last night with our other esteemed colleague, Chris Brown. Yes, that is his name, and yes, he is as spectacular as he sounds. We were hanging out watching hoops, and this was the last game of the evening. And when I think it was Timmy Allen, was that who was that?
I think so.
When Timmy Allen, yeah, because he was 1 of 1 from the 3-point line. Timmy Allen doesn't shoot threes. When Timmy Allen banked in that shot at halftime, I left. I went home. I was like, I don't need to see anymore. This is just over. I don't need to see any more of it. And I was right. It got a little closer in the second half, 46-41. Xavier won the second half. But when you dig yourself a 42-25 hole in the first half against Texas, don't mess with Texas. It's probably not going to go well for you. I mean, like Dylan Dessou had 0 points. Dylan Mitchell had
Dylan Dessou only came in so that he could say he played in the Sweet 16.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, Dylan Dessou was out of this game with injury, which was it is a concern moving forward.
Brock Cunningham 1 point. Just like you got 3 or 4 really, really high quality performances in this game from your backcourt in Tyrese Hunter and Marcus Carr. Both of them had 18 and 19 respectively. They had 8 assists combined to just 3 combined turnovers. Serge Ibaka, I salute Serge Ibaka Rice, 16 on 6 of 10. Like he's got to be the national 6th player of the year, right? He's got to be up there.
Is that an actual award?
I don't think so.
No, but I think we should just give it to him.
I think we should just give it to him. Like I'm not sure. I can't like I'm not sure who else would even be in consideration.
No, he might be. There's an argument he's the best player on their team.
Maybe it's how many games did Quinterly start this year? Did he start too many? I don't know how many games he started because Quinterly is the other name that came to my mind. But
yeah, he's not on Serge Ibaka's level though.
It's probably true. It's probably true. I mean, I would agree with that statement, but he was just that was the other name that came to my mind. But he had 16 on 6 of 10 shooting. Maybe Christian Bishop is also in the running for 6th man of the year. I don't know. He had 18 and 9 on 8 of 12 shooting. Deep is the Texas team, and they were just better than Xavier on this particular night.
Yep. And
Adam Kunkel 8 of 10 shouts.
I am happy for him because it just seems like every time I watch them, and I know that the numbers don't really back this up because he is a very good 3-point shooter. It just seems like he misses a lot of shots. And yeah, that was not the case in this game. He was excellent. Just didn't get enough from the rest of the squad. And Xavier had that first half performance, 25 points. This was kind of the story of, well, outside of their last game where they made everything that they took, right? Bad first half. Can you come back in the second half? Against Kennesaw State, you can do that. Texas, you can't.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
And from a Texas standpoint, yeah, the beautiful thing about having 7 starters is, Timmy Allen missed time in the Big 12 tournament. Didn't matter. Dylan Dessou effectively didn't play in this game. Didn't matter. At some point, it probably matters.
We'll see.
Because And especially with Dessou because of what he gives you defensively and how good he's been recently. But then you're also looking at now the other problem here is, okay, you got Miami 4 to deal with first, and then you have the other best team remaining in this tournament, whoever wins that other regional final.
Mm-hmm.
If you were on the other side of the bracket, I would be a little bit less concerned about it. But we're going to get the two best teams in this tournament remaining, assuming that Texas beats Miami, or actually maybe even regardless, because if Miami beats Texas, that means they did what they did to Houston.
Yep.
In that Final Four game. And so that's where it's a little bit of a concern. It just doesn't matter though. It's remarkable what they're able to do to just adjust and figure out with the pieces that are available how to make it work. And yeah, this is one of the better NCAA tournament prediction wise I've had, and I know you feel the same way with you having Creighton in the Final Four, for example. That's looking awfully good right now. So maybe we do know what we're talking about at least a little bit.
Yeah, but then Purdue lost to a number 16 seed. So
yeah, you can't get them all right.
And then,
And I would argue that was as much because of just you decided that you're going to pick Purdue until Matt Painter does it rather than you actually picking Purdue, right? You were just team right. Matt Painter.
Yeah.
That can be the justification at least.
And here Gonzaga is. They're going to go win the national championship, and I'm not going to have picked them to win the national championship. It's fine. It's fine. But yes, if I get two of the four teams I predicted to make the Final Four in the Final Four, that's like pretty good year for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because trying to predict the NCAA tournament is silly.
It was funny when the Creighton game went final.
Mm-hmm.
The percentile of my bracket, just because Creighton won, right? This has nothing to do with max points. This has nothing to do with just adding the points that Creighton gets from winning that Sweet 16 game. The bracket went up 20 percentiles or something like that.
Love that for you. Love that.
It just made me laugh that we're getting to the point where, right. And it's always my kind of my bracket thing. I'm not going to get them all right in the first couple rounds. I don't try and predict the chaos because that's a waste of energy for me. What I try and get is Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four, the storylines and kind of how this tournament's going to develop, a good thought process for it. And so it does. Watching all these games and these teams all season does have its benefits.
Last thing. Successful Xavier season, first year under Sean Miller.
Absolutely.
I would agree with that. If they lose to Kennesaw State, successful?
Can I say not successful or disappointing?
That's a cop-out, but sure.
Yeah. If you got to give me one or the other, I'll still say successful because I don't care about the NCAA tournament stuff as we've established. Now, that's only because it's Sean Miller's first season.
Sure. Yeah.
Because
that's why I said Sean Miller's first season.
Right. If that was year 2, year 3, different conversation. Because this team should be up at the top of the Big East. I would argue they should have been better as a whole. The body of work should have been better than it was.
No Zach Freemantle for a big chunk.
Yes. Yeah, right. That's definitely part of it. You didn't have a lot of depth. And the most important thing, though, is he clearly made a difference and made this team better and got that fan base excited again after a lot of frustration. That trumps everything else. So, yes, ultimately, without a doubt, successful season.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think if you get to a point where your season ends because you lost to a team that's better than you,
right?
Then especially when it comes in the Sweet 16, like that's not a horrible place to bow out. It's when things go awry and you lose to a bunch of teams you shouldn't, and then your season ends because you lost to a team you shouldn't. That then we can get into a not successful. But I would think, let me put it this way: if I'm talking to a Xavier fan that's disappointed by this season, I think you need to adjust your expectations, because I'm not sure what else you wanted from Sean Miller's first season. That was actually something, a conclusion that logical people would actually come to. Because they weren't better than Texas, and they weren't better than Texas all year. So
right. They were a top 15 team.
Right. And Texas was a top 5.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There you go. There you go. You got
Doesn't
anything
need more
else?
complicated than that.
You got anything else?
You want to make predictions for today real quick?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Today on the slate, Saturday, March 25th. You got 2 games. We're to that point. Florida Atlantic versus Kansas State is the first game. That's at 6:09 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on TBS at Madison Square Garden in New York. New York. What say you? Florida Atlantic, Kansas State. If you pick against Jerome Tang at this point, I mean, that's your more power to you. But who you got in the early game tonight?
I'm going with the Wildcats.
The Wildcats. Wildcats.
I don't.
Sorry, that's the
There you
wrong
go.
Wildcats. My bad.
I don't want to pick against Marquise Noel in that building. They have the best 2 players on the floor. They should win this game, which is something that Florida Atlantic hasn't really faced yet. I know Tennessee was a 4 seed. I don't care. We've been over this.
Mm-hmm.
That was not full-strength Tennessee, and that's a inherently vulnerable Tennessee team. We both picked Florida Atlantic to win that game. The fact that we are both very much not picking Florida Atlantic to win this one tells you the difference between the two.
Yep.
Can they do it? Absolutely. This isn't to say that Florida Atlantic has no chance. They're an excellent basketball team who, by the way, are going to win more games than anybody in the country this season. That might even be final. I would have to go look.
I think it has to be. Well, no. San Diego State could match them.
Yeah, okay. I didn't.
Because San Diego State is no. Well, I'm gonna go look while you're talking. But yes.
So, but right, Houston is gone.
No, I lied.
So Florida,
San Diego. It was Alabama who had 31 wins. San Diego State is only 30-6. So even if they won the national championship game, they would still only get to 33 wins.
So there you go. 34 wins is going to be the most Florida Atlantic already has.
I take it back. Gonzaga's 31-5. They could still they could tie them.
Yeah.
Freaking Gonzaga. Freaking Mark Few. Ruining everything.
Yeah. So, okay. Gonzaga. So, yeah. They haven't clinched it yet. But obviously, they belong here. They are not phony by any stretch of the imagination. They're just, like Xavier, going to run into a team that's better than them. And Kansas State's going to take advantage of this glorious path that got laid out.
Look at that. Look at Kansas State. I got Kansas State.
I have a Kansas State Tang theory that I'm going to save until their season ends one way or another.
Oh boy! All right. Is it like Scott Drew is underneath his hat, like pulling him like Ratatouille? Is that your theory?
No, it's just about what the program becomes moving forward.
All right, fair. UConn, number 4 UConn, number 4 seed that is. Number 3 Gonzaga at T-Mobile Arena, not to be confused with the T-Mobile Center in Kansas City. T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. That is the home of the West region this year, and UConn will take on Gonzaga. Both teams, I mean, UConn's looked incredibly convincing. Gonzaga has gotten it done so far.
Yep.
And here they are. They will meet at 8:49 p.m. on TBS. What say you, Mr. Doring?
I'm riding with Gonzaga.
With the Zags, he said.
I don't feel great about it, but I'm not backing down from my Final Four pick now. If I'm UConn, a UConn fan, I'm almost scared that they're playing too well.
I'm anti that kind of like thought, but I get what you're saying.
Because I almost feel like we're to the point where either this is going to, and again, it's difficult because of this side of the bracket that you also have Gonzaga and Texas you have to get through, theoretically. Because otherwise, I mean, if they just keep this up, they're probably going to win the whole thing. But Texas is one of maybe the only team out there that can match them at their height. Because I'm not sure Gonzaga can, to be quite honest. If you get the very best version, if you get the very best version of Gonzaga, they can. But we haven't seen that yet. So that's the other part of this is what Gonzaga shows up. But I'm not backing down from my Final Four pick.
And no matter what version of Gonzaga shows up, that's the best team that UConn will have played in this tournament.
Correct. Yeah.
Because they didn't have to play Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they took care of business everywhere else. But
right.
Gonzaga in that version of Arkansas are in a different class.
Yes. And Gonzaga's already had to play TCU and UCLA. This should be phenomenal.
I'm really excited about that one.
Yeah.
I wasn't there pre-tournament to pick Mark Few to win the national championship. I am not putting myself in the position when I have an opportunity again. Okay? I'm going with the Zags. The thing that it all starts with that matchup down low between Drew Timme and Adama Sanogo. Can Drew Timme be efficient against a guy that is more physically imposing than he is? Right? Can a guy that will be able to be physical with him and that he's not going to overwhelm with his size, and can he be super efficient? Because if he can, then we can talk. But he's got to win that matchup. For me, that's where it starts because if UConn's guards play just good, they're probably going to win that side of the matchup. Because UConn's guards are just better than Gonzaga's guards night in, night out. Even though they have their inconsistencies, it's not as inconsistent as Gonzaga's guards can be on some nights.
Or as consistently uninspiring.
Right. So that's where it starts for me. The other thing is who in the world guards Donovan Clingan when he comes in off the bench? In theory, there are some options, but nobody nearly as productive, right? So those are Gonzaga, because they have Drew Timme, because he's one of the best players in the country, he needs to find a way to be the most productive big man in this game. Then we can talk.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but if UConn plays at a really high level and the level that they've played the first 3 games to get here, I think I agree with you that if they bring that performance and Sanogo is really hard to stop in the middle and Jordan Hawkins is really great, then I'm not totally sure Gonzaga can keep up with that. But we'll see.
Unless this is the game where the guards show up.
Right. That's assuming that we don't get an outlier game from the guards.
Right. There's just no reason to assume that's what's going to happen.
But with all of that being said,
Timme needs to be the best player on the floor.
But with all of that being said, I'm not going to be the guy who misses out twice on picking Mark Few to get to the Final Four. Not going to be that guy. So here I am. At least I remain consistent. You know what I'm saying? Remain consistent. Yes, I picked Purdue to go to the Final Four, and they lost as the number 1 seed to a number 16. But here I am batting with the same bat again. And if I strike out again, that's just fine. All right, anything else?
It just kind of makes me, I guess, laugh. I wanted to find a different phrase, and I'm just tired, so I didn't have one. But we're probably going to get 2 UConn teams in the Elite Eight, assuming the women's team takes care of business. It's just funny to me that the other team out there is Miami. Somehow, some way, they're taking down 1 seeds on both sides. Ended Maddie Seeger's career, ended Marcus Sasser's career. NIL money talks. This is a very interesting story kind of heading into next season with the runs that both these teams are making.
I leave you with the only thing I know how to. Last night, the Memphis Grizzlies were 25-42 from the 3-point line. Last night, Luke Kennard was 10 of 11 from the 3-point line. Last night, Desmond Bane was 5 of 7. Tyus Jones was 3 of 4. Dylan Brooks was 2 of 3, and they shot 61% as a team. That's all I know. That's all I know how to leave you with.
Did Luke Kennard end 10 of 11 from the field?
That's correct.
My favorite part.
That's correct.
Excellent.
He had 30 points on 10 of 11 from the field, and all 30. He took no free throws. No free throws.
No free throws, no 2-point
He
shots.
was just 10 of 11 from the 3-point line. That's all I know how to leave you with. Please subscribe to the Jay Stratus podcast on Apple. His middle name does not start with J, by the way. I checked.
Oh,
it's Douglas.
I appreciate the effort.
It's Douglas, so it's unfortunate. Not a ricochet shot at Douglas, just a ricochet shot at that. It's not Jacob or something like that. Please subscribe to the Jay Stratus podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jay Stratus Pod. You can find the YouTube video versions of this podcast on our YouTube channel. Just search up Jay Stratus Podcast in the search bar, and you should find us there. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. We'll be back tomorrow on Sunday morning to recap tonight's Elite Eight games. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.